Thank you. Yes, it is working. Great. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Honorable judges, distinguished speakers, and guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a really huge pleasure to be here, and before I actually start my talk, I would like to thank the organizers for this wonderful conference and for having invited me. It's been really amazing to return to Pakistan after a short kind of absence. The previous speaker in the first session started his talk, with a remark about how long it would take a professor of law to deliver all of his knowledge. And he thought it would take about 6 minutes, as long as the professor was speaking slowly. So my aim, of course, is now to deliver my speech, talking very slowly in about 5 minutes, and convince you that this is all what I have to say. So, Mr. Jonathan Wood, thank you very much, for this really very encouraging remark, this morning. So, with some sense of trepidation, I'm going to start my talk. Now, I congratulated the organizers of this conference, and I do so advisedly, because on the 29th of April 2017, at 2:30 in the afternoon, I myself organized a conference on arbitration in Pakistan whilst I was the Dean of the Law School at LUMS. And I'm just going to read out the title of this conference. It was Arbitration and Pakistan, a lost cause, ? And in fact, two of our speakers are here today, Mr. Landau QC and Mr. Faisal Nakri. So it would have been interesting to actually ask them on the panel, how they actually assessed their contributions to that conference in 2017. But I myself drawing a kind of preliminary conclusion after 5 years, clearly have to admit that this was the wrong title. And that actually arbitration in Pakistan is definitely not a lost cause, as is very much in evidence by the fact that the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators is now actually starting a branch here in Pakistan, that we have a very active judiciary who is actively participating and supporting this conference and the growth of international commercial arbitration and domestic commercial arbitration in Pakistan. For my substantive contribution, which of course has to be short, I was reminded of a PhD student of mine who is currently working on how to improve the arbitration regime in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. And he has come up with an interesting idea of visualizing how arbitration regimes work and how they can be improved. And I think his reference points were actually the 5 pillars of Islam. The idea that there are constituent parts which basically create a system, a faith, or, he said by extension, an arbitration system. So if you have 5 pillars of Islam, what would be the pillars of an arbitral system which works and meets the demands and needs of the users? My student called them the modernization pillars, and he identified 3. He said the first pillar, the first modernization pillar, is legislation. You need to have, and this kind of reflects actually the remarks, the introductory remarks, very insightful remarks of the Honorable Judge. Namely, you need good legislation. I won't put it any more sophisticated than saying good legislation, because I think we all now know that the arbitration regime, at least as far as domestic arbitration is concerned in Pakistan, is deficient and needs to be improved. I think it is fair to actually just call a spade a spade. The second modernization pillar, actually, in that PhD thesis, is a good judiciary. A judiciary which is supportive of arbitration, be it domestic or international. And I think you can also see that in Pakistan this actually is now happening. And we see very much in evidence at this conference. The third modernization pillar identified is arbitral institutions. So my PhD student looking at the arbitration scene in the UAE says, well, actually unless you have functioning arbitral institutions, you will not be able to actually grow a properly arbitration system. And again, you know, with the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, for instance, you can see that an organization like this would really kind of bring value into the arbitration system in Pakistan. Now, I've been supervising the thesis for a while, and it is really only when I was actually here on my way from Islamabad to Lahore that I realized that actually these modernization pillars are incomplete. An important pillar is missing. And that missing pillar is legal education. And the reason why legal education is so important, I'm going to just outline in a few words. If you look at arbitration dispassionately, you would probably find that really it can be bifurcated, divided into two main components. And arbitration practitioners only tend to talk about one of them. And this is the process of arbitration. It is how arbitrations are organized, what is the seat, what is the administrative law, what is the process of arbitration. The second part, which is perhaps ignored, is what I would call the substantive part. Namely, what actually is the arbitration, the dispute is about. And again, I find it encouraging that in the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, for instance, in their training and testing regime, they talk as much about process as about knowledge of the law of obligations. Because unless you know your law of contract, you will not be able to actually act as a commercial arbitrator. It is as simple as that. You know, as nice, attired and as smooth you are in your arbitral process and proceedings, if the award actually suffers because it doesn't understand the law, it will be unenforceable and open to challenge. Now, in terms of what can be improved, this is of course the brief of our panel. So in terms of process, of course, we actually have a lot of resources. We have the arbitral rules of a number of arbitral institutions, the ACIA, the ICC. We have regional arbitration centers which have their own rules, from Saudi Arabia, Oman to DIFC, to DIAC. And if I know it sounds perhaps a bit presumptuous, but actually on the whole, as an arbitrator, these rules are very approachable. They are quite similar. There might be something indifferent. So if I go and arbitrate in Saudi Arabia, I have to make sure that my award is enforceable as a matter of Sharia. If I advise parties to arbitrate with the DFC, ACA, I would say, well, actually, if you when it still existed, if you put a deposit there, it won't earn interest. But if you have your deposit of your fees in London under the ACA London rules, it will earn an interest on your deposit. But these are kind of small differences. So in terms of process, I think Pakistan would not face that many challenges, because starting an arbitral institution, perhaps attached to a university as one where I used to be a dean at LUMS, I think that wouldn't be so difficult to do. But what about the second component, the substance, the application of the law? I think it is here actually where in some ways domestic arbitration and host countries of arbitrations perhaps have the greatest need of development. So if I look, for instance, at Pakistan, I find that many lawyers I meet actually have obtained the University of London LLB degree and then took quite a few years to actually learn about Pakistani law. So if they act as arbitrators or counsel in arbitration seated in Pakistan and governed by Pakistani law, actually the English LLB might not be the complete answer. And this now, in a kind of circular fashion, brings me back to the fourth modernization pillar, legal education. I think it is here that Pakistan really needs to invest more, but has also already achieved a lot. So when I was the dean of the law school at LUMS, it was still possible to get a law degree within 3 years, and LUMS was one of the very few universities that actually demanded a 5-year LLB. Now, 5 years later, standing here in 2022, actually all law degrees in Pakistan are 5 years degrees. So I promised that this would be a very, very short kind of talk. So what I really would like to bring into this conference is the need to focus on legal education of Pakistan and to take pride in law schools and legal education and training, as for instance offered by the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. So again, thank you very much for having me, and I say Khoda Hafiz.